Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At this time, I'd like to yield to my colleague from Texas who served as a naval aviator, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Olson, for as much time as he may consume.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
I thank my colleague from Pennsylvania, and Mr. Speaker, I yield myself as much time as I shall consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, it is my honor to rise today in support of House Resolution 445, a resolution I introduced earlier this year honoring 100 years of military aviation. But before I begin my remarks, I'd like to thank Armed Services Chairman Skelton, Ranking Member McKeon, as well as Subcommittee Chair Abercrombie and Ranking Member Bartlett. Mr. Speaker, as a former naval aviator, I have first-hand knowledge of the vital and essential role the airmen of the United States military play in protecting our homeland and strengthening our global alliances. Given the air superiority the United States enjoys today, it's easy to forget that 100 years ago there was much skepticism about the usefulness of aircraft for our armed forces. Shortly after the Signal Corps purchased its first aircraft for military purposes, Scientific American, a respected publication, wrote, "Outside of scouting duties, we are inclined to think that the field of the airplane will be rather limited because of its small carrying capacity and the necessity for its operation at great altitude. If it is to escape hostile fire, the amount of damage it will do by dropping explosives upon cities, forts, hostile camps, or bodies of troops in the field, to say nothing of battleships at sea, will be so limited as to have no material effects on the issues of a campaign." 100 years later, American courage, ingenuity, and innovation have proven them very wrong. We have come a very long way since Assistant Secretary of the Navy Theodore Roosevelt recommended that the Secretary investigate Professor Samuel Langley's so-called flying machine and report on its potentiality for use in combat. The earliest planes were open cockpit, single-seat mounts, and the only weapon was a sidearm and perhaps a few bricks that could be dropped on the enemy. During World War I, America's first military aviators wrote their instruction manual as they lived it and created traditions that are still honored and followed today. In the aftermath of Pearl Harbor, America's airmen delivered the first moral victory of World War II, flying B-25s from the deck of the aircraft carrier Hornet, 400 miles from the shore of Japan. Colonel Jimmy Doolittle and the Knights of the Air struck back and struck back hard. And less than 2 minutes later, U.S. military aviation changed world history at the Battle of Midway. In 1947, Congress and President Truman wisely recognized the important role our country's airmen play on the battlefield and established the United States Air Force, a new separate branch of military service. From the hills of Korea, where our newest branch rose to the occasion and won 10 out of every 11 air engagements, to the jungles of Vietnam, where the ingenuity and versatility of our military aviators were tested like never before, the stories of the valor and the courage displayed by our country's airmen throughout our history are too numerous to tell. And on September 11, 2001, as F-16s were flying low over Washington, D.C., and our country entered a new unconventional war against an unknown enemy, America's brave airmen were on duty, ready to defend. Whether pinpointing enemy fires along the ridges of eastern Afghanistan from the cockpit of a P-3 Orion, manning a C-17 to deliver needed supplies to our troops on the ground, or operating strategic airstrikes with a Predator drone from thousands of miles away, today in Iraq and Afghanistan, our military aviators remain on guard. General Curtis LeMay once said, "If we maintain our faith in God, love of freedom, and superior global air power, the future looks good." And today, as we look back on 100 years of military aviation in the United States of America, we honor the heroes of military aviation and thank them for the shining path they created for our country. Indeed, the future looks good. I urge my colleagues to support House Resolution 445 and yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman